The overhead chime didn't wake her. It was the shift in the engine's pitch. A subtle, whining descent that shouldn't happen over the Rockies. Then came the PA system, cracking with static and raw, unfiltered panic. If there are any military pilots on board, please ring your call button. Seat 8A was supposed to be a sanctuary. Harper Cole pressed her forehead against the cold, vibrating plexiglass of the window, trying to let the low hum of the twin GE engines lull her to sleep. She was exhausted in a way that sleep couldn't entirely fix. It was a bone-deep, marrow-sucking fatigue that came from 9 months on a Nimitz-class aircraft carrier, flying F/A-18 Super Hornets off a pitching deck in the pitch black of the Philippine Sea. Her body was technically back in the States, sitting in the premium economy cabin of a Boeing 767 en route from Dallas to Seattle. But her nervous system was still operating on military time. Every sudden clatter from the beverage cart, every sharp cough from a passenger, spiked her adrenaline. She just wanted 4 hours of uninterrupted nothingness. The cabin was dimmed to a bruised purple. Most of the window shades were drawn against the high-altitude sun, creating a sleepy, artificial twilight. To her right, in 8B, a middle-aged guy in a quarter-zip sweater was aggressively clicking through a spreadsheet. He smelled like generic airport cologne and stale coffee. Earlier, he had tried to strike up a conversation, glancing at the olive-drab duffel bag shoved under the seat in front of her. "Military?" he'd asked. Harper had just given a tight, closed-mouth smile, nodded once, and put her noise-canceling headphones over her ears. She wasn't in the mood to explain the mechanics of a catapult launch to a regional sales manager. She closed her eyes. The aircraft was cruising at 34,000 feet. Smooth air. The autopilot was doing the heavy lifting, flying a precise, invisible highway in the sky. Commercial flying always felt profoundly sterile to her. In the Hornet, she wore the jet like a second skin. She felt every knot of airspeed in her spine, every G-force pressing the blood out of her brain. Flying a fighter was an act of sustained, managed violence. Riding in a commercial airliner was like sitting in a flying waiting room. She drifted off, her head lolling against the bulkhead. She wasn't sure how much time had passed before the physics of the aircraft woke her. It wasn't a bump. It was a drop. A severe stomach-into-the-throat loss of altitude that instantly pinned her against her seatbelt. The cabin erupted. Someone in the back screamed. The sales manager next to her gasped, his laptop lifting off his tray table and slamming back down. The overhead bins rattled violently, the plastic panels groaning under the sudden structural stress. "Clear air turbulence," Harper's brain calculated instantly. It happened. You hit a pocket of dead air or a massive jet stream shear, and the plane falls a few hundred feet before the wings find bite again. But it was what happened next that made her pulse jump. When an airliner hits a massive pocket of turbulence, the autopilot usually disengages, or the pilots immediately take manual control to stabilize the deck angle. The recovery should be firm, but smooth. You power through, level the wings, and ease the nose up. The recovery of this 767 was anything but smooth. The left wing dipped sharply, an uncoordinated bank that slid the passengers against their armrests. Then, the nose pitched up too hard, the engines whining as they spooled up to catch the sudden loss of airspeed. The aircraft wallowed. It felt heavy, sloppy, like a drunk trying to walk a straight line. Harper sat up straight, her headphones resting around her neck. She looked out the window. The horizon line outside was tilted at a 20-degree angle and the nose was oscillating. "Jesus," the guy next to her muttered, gripping his armrests until his knuckles turned white. "What are they doing up there?" "Overcorrecting," Harper whispered, almost to herself. She frowned, her eyes scanning the front of the cabin. The heavy curtains separating premium economy from first class swayed erratically. Usually, after a drop like that, the captain would immediately key the mic. "Sorry about that, folks. Hit some rough air. Flight attendants, please take your jump seats." There was nothing. Just the drone of the engines and the nervous murmurs of 200 passengers. The plane leveled out, but it felt precarious. The precise, locked-in feeling of the autopilot was gone. The aircraft was being hand-flown, and whoever was flying, it was struggling. Then came the chime. Ding, ding. It was the emergency intercom signal. 10 seconds later, the PA system crackled to life. It wasn't the deep, reassuring baritone of a commercial captain. It was a woman's voice, breathing heavily, the audio clipping with panic. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is the lead flight attendant. We are experiencing a medical situation." A pause. A breath drawn so sharply it sounded like a sob. "If there are any military pilots on board, please ring your call button." The cabin went dead silent. The only sound was the rushing of the slipstream against the fuselage. Harper stared at the blue fabric of the seat in front of her. Her chest tightened. No, she thought. Absolutely not. I don't fly buses. She was a combat pilot. She dropped ordnance on coordinates and landed on moving ships. She didn't know the first thing about the avionics suite of a Boeing Heavy, or its hydraulic systems, or its glide ratios. Someone else will do it, she told herself. There's always a retired Delta guy on these flights, or an Air Force transport pilot. She waited. 5 seconds, 10 seconds. No one stood up. No call buttons illuminated. The plane banked again, an ugly shuddering dip to the right. The engine surged in a delayed, desperate attempt to maintain altitude. Whoever was in that cockpit was losing the fight against the plane's mass. Harper closed her eyes, let out a long, ragged exhale, and reached up. She pressed the button. The soft amber light above 8A illuminated. It felt like a spotlight. The sales manager next to her stared, his mouth slightly open. "You're a pilot?" he asked, his voice entirely devoid of its earlier corporate bravado. "Navy," Harper said flatly. She unbuckled her seat belt. "Let me out, Greg." He scrambled to pull his legs back so she could slip past. She stepped into the aisle just as the curtain to first class parted. A young flight attendant practically fell through it. Her name tag read Chloe. A dark splash of coffee stained her skirt. Chloe looked at Harper, then at the amber light. "You?" "Harper Cole, Lieutenant Commander." "I fly Hornets," Harper said, keeping her voice low. Panic is a contagion. Competence is the only antidote. "What's the situation?" Chloe grabbed Harper's wrist, a massive breach of protocol that screamed desperation, and pulled her through the curtain. First class was a mausoleum of terrified, wide-eyed executives. Harper ignored them. Her mind was compartmentalizing, shutting down the civilian passenger and booting up the officer. They reached the forward galley. Standing by the reinforced cockpit door was the purser, an older man whose face was the color of wet ash. He hung up the internal heavy phone. "Jason, this is Harper," Chloe breathed. "Navy." Jason assessed her. Faded jeans, plain black t-shirt, messy hair. Not exactly the silver-haired savior out of a movie. "Commander," Jason said tight-lipped. "We hit severe clear air turbulence. A massive drop. The flight crew was off harness, having their meals. Harper winced. They hit the ceiling. Hard, Jason confirmed. Captain Miller took the brunt. Had hit the switch panel. He's unresponsive. First Officer Davis is awake, but he landed on the center console. His right arm is shattered. He grabbed the yoke with his left hand, but autopilot disconnected during the drop. He's flying manually, and he's going into shock. A broken arm and shock at 34,000 feet, Harper thought. Flying a 200-ton brick with a non-dominant hand. The sloppy banking made perfect sense. Open the door, Harper said. Jason punched a code into the keypad. The heavy ballistic door clunked open. The noise hit first. A piercing, repetitive wail, wail, wail of the master caution alarm. Red and amber lights strobed across massive glass displays. Then, the smell. Copper and cold sweat. The cockpit was surprisingly cramped. On the left, Captain Miller was slumped against his harness. A deep gash across his forehead leaked bright arterial blood, pooling on his pristine white collar. On the right, First Officer Davis was pale and soaked. His right arm hung at a sickening angle. His left hand was locked in a death grip on the yoke. He was hyperventilating, eyes blown wide, staring blindly at the artificial horizon screen. Davis, Harper said, stepping in and pulling the door shut. He didn't hear her. He flinched, jerking the yoke. The plane tipped left. Harper caught herself on the jump seat behind the captain. She slapped her hand down on the glare shield, right in his line of sight. Davis, look at me. He blinked, pulling his eyes from the screen. Confused, terrified. I'm Lieutenant Commander Cole. United States Navy, she projected over the wailing alarm. I'm a fighter pilot. I'm taking the left seat. I've got you. Can't, Davis gasped. The trim. Can't reach it. I know. Hold it steady for 10 seconds. Harper turned to Jason, who was lingering in the doorway. Get the captain out, now! Jason and Chloe squeezed in. It was a brutal, ugly process dragging the unconscious man backward over the center console. Harper helped haul him out, getting a wet smear of blood across her forearm. They pulled him into the galley, and Jason shut the door. Harper slid into the captain's seat. It felt massive. The yoke was alien. She was used to the minute wrist movements of an F-18 center stick. This required whole-arm leverage. She strapped the 5-point harness tight until the straps dug into her collarbones. The pressure grounded her. All right, Davis, she said, wrapping both hands around the heavy black horns of the yoke. I have the aircraft. You have the aircraft, Davis repeated. The relief broke him. He let go, slumping back and cradling his shattered arm against his ribs. The digital artificial horizon was tilted 12 degrees right. The nose pitched up 4 degrees. Airspeed was bleeding off. They were wallowing in thin air. Aviate. Navigate. Communicate. First, aviate. She pushed the yoke forward to lower the nose, feeding power to the throttles with her right hand. The massive GE engines responded a full second later. The sluggishness was staggering. She had to apply heavy pressure and wait for the plane's momentum to catch up, like driving a semi-truck on ice. She banked left, stepping on the rudder pedals. The digital horizon leveled out. She held the nose steady, letting airspeed build to a healthy cruise, then eased back the power. She clicked the thumb switches on the yoke to trim the heavy pressure away. The yoke neutralized. The aircraft stabilized. Harper slapped the flashing yellow master caution button. Silence crashed into the cockpit, save for the wind rushing over the nose and Davis's ragged breathing. Okay, she said. Davis was practically gray. Stay with me, kid. We're level. Where are we? Seattle Center, he whispered, his eyes closing. Harper found the radio frequency dial and the push-to-talk switch on the yoke. She checked the placard on the dash. Seattle Center, this is Heavy Flight 442, declaring an emergency. A beat of static. Then the sharp, calm cadence of an air traffic controller. Heavy 442, Seattle Center. Go ahead with your emergency. Seattle Center, Heavy 442. Both flight crew incapacitated. I am a non-revenue military pilot. I have taken control, requesting immediate vector to the nearest suitable runway and a patch to a Boeing company pilot. I need a walkthrough on your autopilot suite right now. A heavy pause settled on the radio. Heavy 442, the controller said, dropping into the dead calm cadence of emergency protocols. Copy emergency, radar contact. Getting a company pilot on the line. What is your flight experience on the 767 airframe? Harper looked at the wall of glass screens, the hundreds of switches, the foreign overhead panel. 0, Harper said. I've never flown one in my life. The radio cracked, slicing through the heavy, tense air of the cockpit. Heavy 442, this is Captain Jim Reynolds, Boeing Flight Standards. I hear we've got a Navy pilot in the left seat today. Reynolds' voice was a lifeline. It was an older voice, raspy, steeped in decades of aviation coffee and low-altitude pressure. It wasn't the frantic pitch of a panicked passenger. It was the measured, deliberate drawl of a man who solved problems for a living. Harper pressed the push-to-talk switch on the yoke. That's an affirmative, Captain. Lieutenant Commander Harper Cole. I have around 2,000 hours in F/A-18S. Exactly 0 in a 767. Copy that, Commander. First things first. Let's get the robot flying. Look at the glare shield right in front of you. The mode control panel. Harper scanned the dizzying array of dials, buttons, and LCD windows spanning the dashboard above the primary screens. I see it. Center of the panel. Look for a button labeled CMDA or CMDB. That's your autopilot engage. Before you press it, make sure the yoke is neutral and you aren't fighting the trim. Harper checked the artificial horizon, straight and level. She reached up and pressed CMDA. A green light clicked on. The heavy resistance in the yoke instantly vanished, replaced by a rigid mechanical stiffness as the servos took over. The aircraft settled into a solid groove, locking onto its current heading and altitude. Harper exhaled sharply, dropping her hands from the horns of the yoke. Her forearms were burning. The physical relief was immediate, but her heart rate remained pinned at 120 beats per minute. Autopilot is engaged, Harper said. Good work, Navy. Now how is my first officer doing? Harper looked to her right. Davis had deteriorated. His skin was the color of old parchment, clammy and gleaming with cold sweat. His breathing was rapid and shallow. The shock of his shattered arm was overwhelming his nervous system. He's going down, Harper said, keeping her voice low so Davis wouldn't panic further. He needs trauma medics on the ground the second we stop moving. I am single pilot up here. Understood. We are vectoring you direct to Seattle Tacoma International. Runway 16 left. It's 12,000 feet of dry concrete. You've got plenty of room. We are descending you to 10,000 feet. Copy. Captain Reynolds. What's the weather at SeaTac? A slight pause on the radio. Overcast. Ceiling is at 800 feet. Visibility is 2 miles with light rain. It's a standard Seattle afternoon. Harper swore softly under her breath. 800 feet. That meant she would be flying blind through heavy clouds, relying entirely on the digital screens, until she was barely a minute from touchdown. In her Hornet, she had a heads-up display projecting the runway path directly onto her visor. Here, she had to look down at unfamiliar instruments while hurtling toward the ground at 200 miles an hour. "Commander," Reynolds said, reading her silence, "normally we'd have you program the flight management computer for an autoland, but walking you through the CDU menus right now is too risky. You might accidentally dump the flight plan and disconnect the autopilot. We're going to do this old school. Air traffic control will give you headings and altitudes. You dial them into the panel. The plane flies them. When you break out of the clouds, you disconnect the autopilot and hand fly the flare." "Can you do that?" "I can do that," Harper said. It was a lie of necessity. She had no idea how this heavy beast handled at low speeds. "Okay, look at the panel again. Find the altitude window. Spin the dial down to 10,000. Then hit the button next to it that says FLCH, Flight Level Change." Harper dialed the numbers and pressed the button. The auto throttles immediately snapped back, pulling the thrust levers out from under her resting hand. The roar of the massive GE engines spooled down to a quiet hum. The nose of the 767 dipped. The descent had begun. Behind her, the cockpit door clicked and swung open. Jason, the purser, stood in the galley holding a small paper cup of water. His hands were shaking. "Captain Miller is stable, but he hasn't woken up," Jason reported, leaning in just enough to hand her the cup. "The passengers know something is wrong. The descent is steep." "Tell them the truth, Jason," Harper said, downing the water in one gulp. Her throat was painfully dry. "Tell them both pilots are incapacitated, but a military pilot is at the controls. Tell them we are landing in Seattle in 20 minutes. Keep them in their seats. Nobody moves." Jason nodded tightly. "Good luck, Commander." He shut the heavy door, sealing her back into the sterile, alarm-ready environment of the flight deck. The altimeter unwound rapidly. 20,000. 15,000. At 12,000 feet, the clear blue sky vanished. The 767 plunged into the thick gray soup of the Pacific Northwest cloud layer. The cockpit darkened instantly. Rain began to streak across the thick windshields. Vertigo crept into the edges of Harper's vision, a physiological illusion caused by the lack of a visible horizon. Her inner ear screamed that the plane was turning left, but her eyes, locked on the digital attitude indicator, told her they were perfectly level. "Trust your scan," she thought. "Cross-check. Attitude, airspeed, altitude, heading. Heavy 442, Seattle approach." A new controller voice came on. "Turn left, heading 190. Descend and maintain 4,000. Harper spun the heading bug and adjusted the altitude dial. The plane banked sluggishly in the gray void. She looked at Davis. His eyes were closed. His chest barely moved. "Stay with me, Davis," she muttered. She reached over and tapped his good knee. He didn't stir. She was entirely alone. "Heavy 442, you are 5 miles from the outer marker. Reduce speed to 160 knots. Drop your gear, lower flaps to 30. Harper hauled the flap lever back into the detent. Deep within the wings, heavy hydraulic actuators groaned as massive metal slabs extended into the slipstream. She grabbed the wheel-shaped gear handle and slammed it down. A rushing roar filled the floorboards. Thud! 3 green lights illuminated on the center dash. Gear down and locked. The drag was immense. The auto throttles surged. the massive GE engines roaring to fight the wet, thick air. "Commander," Reynolds' voice cracked in her headset, "you are on the glide path. Listen to me. You're Navy. You're trained to fly a glide slope straight into the deck. A controlled crash. If you do that to a 767, you will shear the main gear struts and rip the engines right off the wings. You have to flare. Arrest the descent rate just before touchdown." Understood. Her jaw ached. She gripped the yoke with her left hand, resting her right firmly on the thrust levers. The altimeter read 1,200 feet. Still nothing but gray soup outside the windshield. "Where is it?" she hissed. 1,000 feet. 900. At 800 feet, the clouds shredded apart. The ground rushed up, a sprawling grid of wet suburban streets, dark pine trees, and a highway choked with traffic. Dead center in the windshield, flanked by violently flashing strobes, was runway 16L. From the cockpit of an F-18, a runway was a massive target. From the high perch of a 767, it looked like a wet piece of tape. "Runway in sight," Harper transmitted. "Disconnect the autopilot. She's all yours, Navy." Harper pressed the thumb switch. A loud, sharp cavalry charge alarm blared, warning that the automation was dead. She slapped the cancel button. Instantly, the physical weight of the aircraft transferred to her arms. Crosswind slammed into the fuselage. The nose drifted right. Harper kicked the left rudder pedal, forcing the nose back to the center line, dipping the right wing to counter the wind. God, it's like wrestling a whale. Her muscles strained against the delayed, sluggish responses of the heavy flight controls. 500, the automated ground proximity voice called out. Cold, synthetic. "A little high," she muttered, easing the throttles back a fraction of an inch. 400. The threshold numbers, a massive white 16L, rushed up to meet them. The rain was blinding, the windshield wipers thumping violently in a frantic, abrasive rhythm. 300. Her eyes darted continuously between the airspeed indicator and the concrete. 145 knots. Perfect. 200. She was over the pavement. The runway edge lights blurred past.